Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Continuing the Call, a seminary dropout's guide to discernment. Before we get into today's show, I just wanted to take a sec and ask everyone to please make sure you're subscribed and following along to this podcast. And if you have a sec, please also leave a review. The more reviews and listeners we have, the wider the reach can be. Our goal for the show is just to provide resources for those men and women who are currently discerning God's will for their life, and also just have conversations that normalize and promote vocations. Again, the whole thinking behind it is we have a lot of men and women who are doing fantastic things in the church today, but a lot of that started for them while they were discerning either the priesthood or the religious life. So the more we have conversations like the one we have today with our fantastic guest, the more we can continue to cultivate a culture of vocations. So once again, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with somebody you think might benefit from it. Today we're joined by Miss Dominique Seraphin. Dominique is a Haitian American Catholic speaker born and raised in New York. Dominique grew up as a lukewarm cradle Catholic, but had a massive reversion to the faith at the age of 18 when attending World Youth Day in 1993 in Denver, Colorado. Since her reversion, she has dedicated her life to serving the church in various capacities, including high school and college campus ministry, as well as serving in a variety of parish and diocesan roles. Notably, Dominique spent 3 years discerning religious life with the Franciscan Sisters of the Renewal, which is what a lot of our conversation today centers around. Recently, she has found herself working as a mentor with the Given Institute, where she has had the privilege of guiding and inspiring beautiful young adult women through spiritual mentorship and coaching. Passion for spiritual growth has led her to pursue a master's in spiritual theology, and she's currently enrolled in the esteemed School of Ministry with Encounter Ministries. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dominique as she shares what led her into her discernment with the Sisters of the Renewal, and also how she's using that formation today in her everyday life. Once again, as we have this conversation, please take a moment at the end of the show to leave a review, share it, and most importantly, say a prayer for all those men and women who are currently discerning God's call for their life. Thanks so much, and hope you enjoy our conversation with Miss Dominique Seraphin. Dominique, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to meet you. Do you want to share kind of a little bit about yourself and kind of where you're coming from?
Sure. So my name is Dominique Seraphin, and I am originally from New York City, born and raised in New York, and then later on moved to Long Island, and cradle Catholic my entire life. And it was probably when I was 18 years old, I had this reversion back to the faith. My faith had been pretty lukewarm my entire life. I was going to mass because my mom told me to go, but I wasn't interested. There was no relationship with the Lord whatsoever. And it was actually going to World Youth Day in 1993 in Denver, Colorado, where I went there. And the only reason I went was to go see the Rocky Mountains. I had absolutely no interest in Pope John Paul II. And when I got there and landed in Denver, I was shocked to see how many young people not only were Catholic, but actually loved being Catholic and were in love with their faith. It shocked me. And so as the days unfolded more and more, I got to hear snippets of John Paul II giving a talk here, a homily there. And then, World Youth Day culminates with a pilgrimage. And so we made our pilgrimage to Cherry Creek State Park, which was brutal, 14 miles. And then when we got there, we had evening prayer with John Paul II. And physically, it was a hard trip for me. I think for everybody. Temperatures dipped that night to, I forget, like 40 degrees. And this was August 1993. And then the next morning, temperatures rose to like 103. So it was brutal physically. But I felt like the Lord was preparing me for something big. And so it was in the closing mass for World Youth Day, 1993, when John Paul II gave his famous sermon, "Be not afraid to go out into the streets and to preach the gospel." And something about those words, like I was exhausted. I hadn't showered. I was up all night, and I was like in and out of consciousness, I think. But it was those words, something about those words just transformed my heart. And I just felt compelled for more. I knew that at that moment I was made for more. I was living a very selfish life, and I thought I had it all, and I didn't. And that World Youth Day propelled me into just kind of going deeper into my faith. And so when I came back from World Youth Day, I was on fire. And then, the way the Lord works, the Holy Spirit works, I was invited to go on this retreat with my mom, actually. And I went begrudgingly. I was the youngest person on the retreat. And at this retreat, this Franciscan friar, I'd never seen a Franciscan friar in my life, came up to me and was just trying to talk to me. His name was Father Stan Fortuna. He's a CFR, Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. I thought he looked like Jesus. And we had an incredible conversation during the retreat, and I went to confession, probably for the first time since my confirmation, which was 7th grade. And I had a 2-hour long confession with him, which was transformative. It just speaks into the power of the sacrament of confession and how transformative it is to be free. And so then that experience propelled me into a youth movement apostolate called Youth 2000 New York, which was a Eucharistic centered retreat movement. I attended one, and I'll never forget walking into the retreat place. It was in my parish, and the gym had been transformed into a chapel. The Blessed Sacrament was there, and I remember the friars walking into this gym and genuflecting on both knees and kissing the ground. And I remember being so struck by that. Like, why are they doing that? And it was at that moment that I knew that Jesus was real and present. And, throughout the weekend, there's a Eucharistic procession, and it just also, the transformation continued. So while I was in college, I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to become a police officer, which is pretty laughable because I would have been a horrible police officer. And it was while in college, I went on a pilgrimage to Assisi, and then the Lord just said, I want you to be mine. And at the tomb of St. Clair, I felt very clearly the Lord was calling me to be his. And I freaked out. I cried, and I was like, I'm not worthy. And I came back from that trip in Assisi, and I just started to, discern religious life, and sought the advice of a priest. And the only priest I really knew that I trusted was Father Stan. So I went to him and talked to him, and he directed me and to just go visit orders, and I did. And I ended up joining religious life for 3 years. I ended up joining the Franciscan Sisters of the Renewal, and it was an incredible experience for me. But after those 3 years, I discerned that God was not calling me to religious life any longer. And since then, 7 years after I left religious life, I got married. I'm married now with 2 children, but all throughout my life, leaving religious life and onward, I have been serving the church in various ministries, and it has been wonderful because I gleaned so much from my time in religious life and before. It just really set the tone for me serving in parishes and everything. So yeah, it's been great.
So you mentioned growing up cradle Catholic, but still kind of lukewarm. Where do you think that lukewarmness came from? Was there any part of the faith that really stuck out to you, or was it still just kind of, it's just what we do sort of thing?
Well, growing up as a cradle Catholic, I was really, my dad wasn't a churchgoer, my mom was, and my mom went to church out of duty. She didn't, I remember asking her lots of questions growing up, and she couldn't answer them because she came from a generation where your parents told you to go to church and you went and you didn't ask questions. So my mom just didn't know. It's not like she was holding anything back from me. She just didn't know how to respond to my questions. And so I also went to Catholic school. And for me, very much so, in Catholic school, religion was just a subject like math or science. It wasn't something that stood out or it didn't integrate into the other subjects. And so to me, religion was just a subject in school, something we did on Sundays. We went to mass occasionally. And it wasn't until, and I think what finally kind of changed our hearts was, first of all, going to that World Youth Day was one thing, but we had a tragedy in our family that really kind of, when something terrible happens in your life, you either run to God or away from God. And my family, my mom ran towards God with us, and we just really surrendered and fell into the arms of the Father. And that was really the transformative period for me, my mom, and my brother. Like, it really changed us to the core, because I feel like the rug was slipped out from under us. So we had a tragic death in the family. That's what happened. Um, and so when I went to World Youth Day, I felt like God was priming my heart for that, because it was 2 years after that that this tragedy happened. But at World Youth Day, my experience was that the church was young and that the church was alive. In my mind growing up, I felt like the church was old and boring. And when I got to World Youth Day, I was like, the church is alive and it's vibrant. And there's young people that are here not because they had to be here, but they want to be here. And they want relationship with Christ. Like, I couldn't believe it. I thought they were being paid to be here. I didn't understand it. And so, yeah, growing up Catholic, my lukewarmness, God was not happy with my lukewarmness. And I thought I had it all together. And when I went to World Youth Day and I saw people who maybe materially didn't have what I had, but there was this genuine and authentic joy in their faces. I was longing for that, because I wasn't happy. Even though I had material goods, I was not happy. And I saw in them something that was attractive, and I wanted to be like them. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And obviously it was relationship with the Lord. But I just kept looking at these people and being like, oh, there's this authentic joy that I'm longing for and I want in my life. What am I missing? And so, yeah, and that's what led me to just pursue this life of like totally for the Lord. I think it was St. Charles de Foucauld. He said, the moment you meet God, there's nothing else I could do but live for him. And that's what I felt like. I was like, when I found out like Jesus is real and that he loved us and he wanted relationship with us, I was like looking at all my friends. I'm like, did you know this? This is great. Like, come on, everybody, jump on board. This is awesome. I just felt so alive. I felt so alive. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's an incredible thing. Is that once you see what other people have, and you're like, where is it coming from? And once you get a little bit of a taste of it, everyone kind of dives in. Now, you mentioned John Paul II, and it's funny because your story is similar to so many people I've talked to, especially with particularly that specific World Youth Day here in the States. But I guess kind of what was it in JP2 that really stood out to you?
Yeah, JP2, I've been to multiple World Youth Days after that, and I've been praying and thinking about him. He's my hero. I love him, and he had a way at World Youth Day. Someone described this recently, and I said, yes, that's it. Even though you were in a sea of millions of people, you felt like he was talking directly to you and that you were the only person in the room. He just had a way of delivering the gospel of the Lord in such a real fashion, but also encouraging and empowering. Like, it is, the famous quotes, Jesus that you seek when you're dreaming of happiness. The way he spoke was just so eloquent and so life-giving that it enlivened me. And so when I was at that World Youth Day and he said those words, be not afraid, like it pierced my heart, because I felt like I'd been living in fear my entire life, fear of fitting in, fear of saying the wrong thing, or fear of putting on this mask to please others, but not God. And so all of a sudden, I felt like John Paul II was calling me, Dominique, in the middle of this millions of young people, to be not afraid, to preach the gospel, be proud of your legacy, of your Christian heritage, that you are the daughter of the Father. And so, yeah, he really inspired me just to be my authentic self. And that's what it was about him, his authenticity. And, young people are attracted to authenticity. And it showed in John Paul too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's beautiful that you say that. I have non-religious family members who have said the same thing, who have been around John Paul II in different occasions, and they all said the same thing as far as, whether you believe or don't believe, there was a presence that he had that nobody could deny, and that draws you in. So now, what happened afterwards? Because it's not an easy thing to go from, you're kind of lukewarm, and then you encounter Christ, and he's there, and he's stepped into your boat, and it says, "Follow me." I imagine that there are some steps in between, this kind of retreat that led you to the religious life. What did that kind of transformation look like?
Sure, yeah. So I'm an extreme personality. And, if I'm all in, I'm all in. And so I remember I went on this Youth 2000 retreat, and I was just like, I was just being fed, and I was receiving and receiving and receiving. And I came home, and I was like, I remember I had just bought a TV for my bedroom, and I was like, Mom, I'm selling this TV. I'm getting rid of all my CDs. I know this is old school, guys. I'm getting rid of all my CDs, and I'm just going to listen to Jesus music. And I just went all in. But what it was just really surrounding myself with people who were like-minded and were going to lift me up. And so um, that's what really was the process, really praying a lot, um, talking to priests. I had a spiritual director. I had gotten a spiritual director, which was Father Stan, speaking to him frequently, praying a lot, frequenting the sacraments, and quieting myself down to hear the voice of the Lord and what He wanted of me. And the bigger question when you're discerning religious life is this me or is this God? Am I doing is this my desire or God's desire? And so when I first felt the call to religious life, I remember going to Father Stan and crying hysterically. And I was like, Father Stan, I'm not worthy of this. Like, I can't be a sister. Do you know what I've done? Do you know who I was? Like, and he was like, yeah, none of us are worthy. It's pure gift. It is a gift. And so when I started to look at it that way, like, okay, God is gifting this to me. And it's up to me to respond to this call because God is a gentleman. And so I just really started to pray, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, then show me. Mother Teresa used to pray this prayer, like, if this is not your will, let it unravel before my eyes. And that's what I did. I said, okay, Lord, one foot in front of the other. You just have to lead me each step of the way. And if this is what you want from me, please show me what it is. So, yeah. So it was just a lot of holy encounters with really good people. Yeah. And prayer, of course.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's awesome. I love that phrase you used, that God's a gentleman, and He offers it, and He says, "Here's what I want, and here's kind of what I'm laying out for your life," and but He doesn't force us, and I think it makes it more beautiful. Now, in those first couple moments when you thought, "Oh, hey, maybe I'm supposed to be a sister, maybe I'm supposed to go take vows," was that something that ever crossed your mind when you were little, or was this kind of the first thing or the first time it had ever come up in your life?
It's the first time it had ever come up in my life. In fact, it was laughable because I was quite boy crazy since I was like in kindergarten. So when I was like, when I tell people, if you want proof that God exists, talk to my parents, because they would have never thought I would have become a religious sister because I was always so boy crazy. And so this is not something I discerned as a child. And that's when I knew the call, there was something here, because this did not come from me. And, when I was a sister, I just remember the first time I put on the habit, and being a religious sister and being called sister. I was Sister Therese Faustina. Those are my girls that got me through religious life. I just remember the first time I got to see my mom, and she saw me in the habit. She just broke down into tears. It was such a testament to the power of the Lord. Like my mother, and I'm sorry for not mentioning this, the times when I was rebellious and rebelling against the faith and not interested in the faith, my mom would just pray and pray and pray and pray. And I encourage moms, if you're listening out there, if your children are away from the church, pray for your children. Pray. My mom would just pray for me incessantly through the intercession of our Blessed Mother. And she just gave me to the Blessed Mother. She's like, Mother Mary, she's yours. You love her more than I do. So take care of her. And she sure did. And so when my mother saw me in the habit, it was absolutely unfathomable to her that her crazy, rebellious, boy crazy daughter was now Sister Therese Bastina. So, yeah.
No, that it's beautiful, and yeah, I think it is. It's always nice to have our own kind of Saint Monica's in our corner. That's what I always joke with my own mom about. Is the same sort of way. So now, I guess, kind of walk me through the formation side of things. So you show up and you say, "Hey, I think I'm called to be a sister." How does kind of temporary vows and formation work? And kind of those 3 years, what did they look like for you?
Sure. So I never made vows. I was a novice, and so when I discerned religious life, I the first step was visiting. the orders. So I visited a few orders. I visited the Sisters of Life, the Missionaries of Charity. I visited the Franciscans of the Renewal. And so the indication that I knew that I belonged there was just that I felt at home. Like, okay, I could do this every day. I could do this, not that life was perfect, but I could do this. And so I made a couple of visits to the Franciscan sisters, and I just kept, there was this like peace every time I went. And so each visit became longer and longer until finally, right before I entered, I made an extended visit. And that's where I took, we took psychological testing. Took psychological testing and had to fill out all this paperwork, basically asking for entrance into this community. And so once everything was done, about 2 weeks later, I heard that I had been accepted. And then now the next step was just, getting rid of my possessions and, clearing debts and getting ready to enter religious life. And so the first step was postulancy. And for us, postulancy was, I believe, 6 months. And we were in we were in postulancy for 6 months, where it's still very much a time of discernment. And religious life is so beautiful because it is an entire time of discernment until you make final vows. There's just always this there's freedom. Okay, if this is not what the Lord is calling us to, then you have the freedom to go. And so the postulancy stage was the very initial stage where I got to live with the community. We wore simple gray jumper, white shirt, and a tau cross around our neck, and we lived the life with the sisters and learned how the sisters did prayer and everything. So we had a very rigorous schedule, and that took getting used to, coming from living in the world to getting up at 5 a.m. And I remember I had developed calluses on my knees from kneeling so much. It was awesome. And then after the 6 months, then we entered into the novitiate. So the religious life sisters usually have a 2-year novitiate. The first year is canonical, which is more almost semi-cloistered, where you're just really taking time to really be set apart from the world and really discern if this is where the Lord has called you, and really entering in deeper into the life and the study, taking more time to study. So we studied about John Paul II's letters to religious women. We read about the life of St. Francis. We did catechism class. And then we spent a lot of time just spending time in prayer. We usually did a holy hour a day. And as a novice, we had to do 2 holy hours a day. And so entering deeper into that. And then the second year is apostolic, where you're living almost like a professed sister, where there's a little more freedom and you're going out to do more of the apostolate of the community. And our particular apostolate was evangelization and work with the poor. So we had soup kitchens, we did retreats, all sorts of things like that. So we would bring food to the needy. And so, the time there was absolutely incredible. It taught me so much about myself, and it's carried into my marriage, but I'll share that a little later. But yeah, that was the process for me, being in religious life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'm excited to kind of dive into what that looks like now. But going back to, I know you mentioned you felt at home with the Sisters of the Renewal, but was there one or two things about either their particular apostolate or way of life? What was the one or two things that really said, these are the sisters that I'm called to discern with, rather, than the Sisters of Life for Missionaries of Charity?
Yeah, and my particular discernment process, I got my call originally in Assisi, at the tomb of St. Clare. So definitely I was partial to St. Francis. However, I just love the Sisters of Life. Before entering the convent, I was very heavily involved in pro-life work, and very in the New York City area, very involved with the Sisters of Life. So I was very familiar with them. And so I was like, okay, this is possibly an order that I could join in. And the Missionaries of Charity, I just always loved Mother Teresa and her work with the poorest of the poor. And so those were the kind of the reasons why I visited those 3 orders. And so, the Missionaries of Charity, I visited them. Incredible sisters, totally selfless, just totally pouring themselves out for the poorest of the poor. But there wasn't joy for me. There wasn't peace for me. Like, they're just, I felt uneasy when I was there. And then the Sisters of Life, when I went to visit them, again, beautiful sisters, their mission of protecting the unborn, incredible. But I felt the Lord, it wasn't jiving with my own heart. I have a heart of evangelization, and I really wanted to do evangelization in various forms. And so then when I visited the CFRs, I just knew this was right. I liked the fact that they did not only soup kitchens or not only retreats, that there was a variety of things. And evangelization was such a huge umbrella for so many different things they could do. And I loved that. And I love that, we got to spend time with the poor and talk with them and minister to them and serve them. And so many times they were serving us by their witnesses. And then, of course, finally, the spirit of St. Francis. I fell in love with the person of St. Francis when I went to Assisi. A lot of times in the church, people think St. Francis is a zookeeper, and he's just so much more than that. He was a passionate man. The guy was blind because he bled over the passion of the Lord. Like, he was an intense man that loved the Lord deeply, and his heart was on fire. And that resonated with me. So that's why I finally chose St. Francis. So it's really kind of figuring out what your charism is and what you identify with the gifts that the Lord has given you. And, if this is where the Lord wants you to use those gifts. So, like, I could never join a teaching order. I've taught in professional life. I've taught in high schools and elementary schools, but it's not something I imagine doing every day. So that was not attractive to me. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and it's a beautiful testimony. And it's funny, similar to mine in a lot of ways. When I was in the seminary and I was already quite a few years in studying for the diocese, I felt a call to kind of discern what was next. And I went and spent some time discerning with the Dominicans, actually. And it was interesting because I loved it, similar to kind of your stories with these other orders of, I loved it. I loved the work that they were doing. But the way that it kind of came to me in prayer was, for me, it felt like vacation, not in the sense of everything was easy and smooth, but it felt like, this is nice. I could be here for a little bit, but it's not home. And the time I realized, no, the diocese was home for me. And I think that that's the best way that you can put it is, when you know, and it's kind of that similarity that I hear people talk about.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's home, because your brothers in the seminary and your sisters in religious life become your family, and you really want to be at home, right? So when you have that sense of, oh, this is my sister, like, this is family. I could do this. I could live the rest of my life with these people. That's when it's right. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So now I guess take me through towards the end of your time in formation. What were you kind of thinking? And I guess kind of how did that shift happen?
So yeah, it was in my second year of novitiate, and I was just struggling, and with every vocation, marriage, religious life, it's the honeymoon phase is goes away. It's not always there. And so I was like, I just kind of chucked it off. Okay, the honeymoon phase is over now. I'm getting into like the nitty gritty of this. And, this is the hard part, and the Lord will give me the grace to do this. But what I felt like was every day it became harder and harder for me to find joy. And, in the convent, we had a poster in the hallway that says, the devil rejoices when he can take away the joy of the servant of the Lord. It's a quote from St. Francis. And so I was just like, I remember walking past that every day and thinking, man, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with joy. And it wasn't anything that was happening necessarily. It was an internal struggle for myself. And so I met with my spiritual director, and he spoke into that and just said to me, well, let's take this to prayer and see what the Lord is wanting of you. And so, yes, like you said, it's that constantly saying, yes, Lord, if this is where you want me, give me the grace. If this is where you want me, give me the grace. And that was like my prayer every day, Lord, I surrender this to you. And if this is a time of a dark night at this moment, that's okay. Just give me the grace. And so the dark night didn't go away. And it started to get just harder and harder for me to just get up in the morning. be vibrant for prayer, and the things that came easily early on became much harder. And then one day, finally, I went to my spiritual director and I said to him, Father, I think I have to go. This is not for me. I don't know what I want to do next, but I know that this is not where I need to be, because it's draining me. It's not life-giving for me at this moment. And maybe there's something going on with me I need to figure out. And so that's when my spiritual director gave me his blessing. He was like, okay, take some time, take 6 months away, go back home, and let's just see what the Lord wants from you next. And maybe that means 6 months you feel better and you come back, or maybe then 6 months you meet a guy and you get married. Let's see what the Lord wants from you. So that's what happened. That was my discernment process out.
It's, again, one of the reoccurring things that comes up in all of my conversations I have is the importance of a good spiritual director, who will say things like that and say, hey, it happens. And again, it's a matter of saying yes and saying yes and saying, Lord, wherever you want me, open that door. So from there, so you took the 6 months, and then obviously that 6 months turned into a little bit longer. Where did you go? Kind of take me through those next couple months, is when you walked out those doors, and what played out.
Right after I left, I took maybe a month. And so I left right before 9/11 happened here in New York. And so literally I was supposed to fly out the week after, 1 2 week after 9/11 to Lourdes. My mom was sending me on a pilgrimage to Lourdes. And so I was supposed to take the exact same flight plan that the terrorists took from Boston to Logan Airport over to Paris. And, then 9/11 happened. And so I think when 9/11 happened, a month after I left, it brought me out of myself. Like when I left religious life, it was hard. It was really hard for me because I didn't know who I was. Like I entered religious life, I was Dominique, and then I came out, I was Sister Therese, but now I'm back to Dominique, and I'm not the same Dominique that was before. And I was just trying to, and I'm living back home, and I was just trying to navigate, it's like almost being reborn. I was like, who am I? And so, I was kind of stuck in this like phase of just confusion. I was very confused. I didn't know who I was. And so when 9/11 happened, it really propelled me to get out of myself and help others around me. And so that finally got me to kind of start to think about, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I did seek the advice of Father Benedict Rochelle. I remember calling him up and saying, Father, people keep asking me, what am I going to do next? And Father goes, what are you doing right now? I said, I'm having a cup of coffee. He goes, you tell people I'm having a cup of coffee right now, and then I don't know what I'm going to do next. Stop asking me. So, yeah, I just felt this constant pressure. Okay, so you left religious life. What are you going to do next? You're going to get married tomorrow? Like, I just didn't know, because I was just trying to navigate coming back into the secular world and not being sister anymore. So, those next couple of months, I ended up also going to visit another community. I ended up visiting the Nashville Dominican Sisters. My name is Dominique. I never prayed through the intercession of St. Dominic. I was like, let's give it a shot. So I went to the Dominican Sisters and I visited them, and it was lovely. The sisters were incredible. And at the end of the visit, I sat down with a one-on-one with the vocation directress, and I was just like, she was like, well, what do you think? Do you want an application? And as soon as she said those words, do you want an application? My stomach just sunk. And I was like, no, sister, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. And so, right within also those 6 months, one of the biggest things I was missing when I left religious life was a sense of community. I just loved being around my sisters and having that sense of like communal prayer and, sitting around the dining room table and eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner with all my sisters. And so, the Lord hears the desires of our hearts. And so I, living here in the New York area, I reached out to some friends who are Sisters of Life and some of the CFR Friars. And I was just like, I just really want this sense of community and I miss it. And so we ended up starting a young adult group in the area called Frassati Fellowship of Catholic Young Adults to respond to this call to community of young adults. I was young adult at the time, and they're still thriving and growing, and that's 20 years now. Like, it's incredible how this little prompt on my heart, like the Lord used it and ran with it. And so yeah, so even in the midst of my utter confusion and trying to navigate back into the world, the Lord, within those 6 months of leaving, brought people into my life and got me out of myself and not getting out of this like self-pity party, and just really got me to serve others in young adult group. And that's when I began to kind of rediscover who I was. So it was really helpful.
You learn how to discern and you learn how to respond. And so when you're in situations like that of, hey, do you want an application as community, you're familiar with that sense of, oh no, that's not really what I want, and it never really leaves you. And I think you're spot on with that idea of, there's so many good things that come with being in formation, and community being the biggest one. I think back to all the people who I've had conversations with, and myself included, of that's probably the number one thing I think people miss the most about once they leave formation, even if it is in the best of circumstances and they are 100% sure that it wasn't for them. Everyone thinks back and says, man, but the community was great. So tell me about how you met your husband, and how that vocation came about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I met my husband. I was teaching in a high school, Catholic high school on Long Island here, and I met him online. My students actually set me up on a singles website without my knowledge, and that's where I met my husband. And so it's a crazy story, but he and I remember when we first started dating or first started talking to each other, I had said to him, well, I have something to tell you about myself. And he was like, he was so scared. What could it possibly be? And I was like, well, I was in religious life. And he was like, oh, that's all? That's so awesome. And so, you don't hear that from every person you date. And so our relationship, we dated for 2 years, 2.5 years, and we got married on the Feast of Divine Mercy at 3 p.m. And it was just a gift to be able to marry him. And he just, preparing for marriage and being married now, and motherhood has just been such a I don't know. It just, religious life really prepared me for this life. In religious life, you're taught to be selfless and to serve your sisters and to anticipate the needs of others. And so when my goodness, that's marriage. Like, if that's not the best pre-Cana ever, I mean, really, go to novitiate. That'll prepare you for marriage. It prepared me so much for marriage, just to kind of be attentive to my husband, be attentive to my children, anticipate their needs, serve them selflessly, and just enjoying every little moment that I have with them. It's just been an incredible journey. And I'm so thankful that God wastes nothing. Sometimes people think when they leave seminary or religious life, like, oh man, I wasted 3, 4, or 5 years of my. No, God uses everything. And so it's never a waste. And the knowledge that I have there is so precious in my heart. And the things that I experienced in religious life will never leave me. And so it has carried on through my marriage and through my motherhood. So yeah, it's been great. We've been married now 13 years.
And then you said you have a couple of kids, right? How is this religious life? How's going from sister to mom been? And what are some of the ways that you've seen that kind of trickle over?
I've always been very maternal. Even when I was in the convent, I was very maternal with my other sisters, always like the caretaker, always taking care of everybody. And so in my motherhood, it's just kind of seemed very seamless, very easy. Religious life is still very prominent in my family because I have a little brother who's 11 years younger than me, who is also now in religious life. He's a CFR priest. And so, so my family still, we still have that community. So, when we get together for holidays, they're all together. All the friars come over to my parents' house and we all hang out and everything. So, but it's prepared me for motherhood. And, I remember when I first had my daughter, you're so excited. And my first child. And I remember she was like 6 months old. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I have no identity except being a diaper changer. And like, that's all I do for this child is feed her and change her diaper and put her to sleep. Like, I felt like my identity was gone. And he looked at me and he was just like, you're just an incredible mother. And God has given you this gift. And, every little part of you that's selflessly giving yourself to her, this is what God created you to do. And you're doing a wonderful job. And even though you may seem like you're just kind of this machine, every little step, every little nurturing, every little kiss, every little snuggle, um, you're doing a great job. So he just reassured me of that. But it was religious life that really taught me, to get out of my own way and serve with joy. Now, I haven't been perfect at that in marriage and motherhood. I will admit it's been a struggle at times. Um, but it's been wonderful just to see how religious life has really primed my heart to be a great mom and a wife.
Absolutely. No, formation is never done. Whether no matter what side of it you're on, whether it's formation or it's marriage and parenthood, it's never done. Now you've quite the resume. Take me through kind of your work. So I know you had mentioned teaching, and I definitely want to hear a lot about kind of your spiritual mentorship and leadership that you do. Take me through that.
So right now, I am working right now at the Augustine Institute as a ministry consultant, and so I get to talk to parishes all over the country just to kind of brainstorm with them what they're seeing, their highs and their lows, their struggles, and how we can serve them. I have a background. When I left religious life, I started working in religious education. So I felt like, okay, Lord, if I'm not called to religious life, I'm called to restore the Catholic family. And so I started working in religious education and I loved it. Just, meeting so many families that were coming in that were broken. And I just wanted to speak into that and just help them to realize that they didn't have to be a theologian, that these parents didn't have to be theologians, that because of the their vocation as mom or dad, that they had the gifts they needed to be able to minister to their own children. So that was my passion for religious education. And then, like I said, I worked in the high school here on Long Island, and it was incredible. I was there for 4 years, one of my favorite jobs ever. I got to be just to help out with putting on retreats, and I became a mentor to many young women in the school. Like, so many of the young women would come into my office and just talk to me about everything from relationships to stresses to school to parents. And I just wanted to be a listening ear, and I wanted to be that safe adult for them as a woman and to really model for them the dignity and vocation of women. And so one of the things I did that was most fun in the high school was I took the girls on nun runs and took them to see different convents. And we just had a great time doing that. In fact, a few of the ladies joined religious life later on after they graduated, which was wonderful to hear because, that the Lord was able to use me in that way. And then now, most recently, like I said, I'm working right now at the Augustine Institute, but some of the other things that I do is I am a mentor, spiritual coach. I have a master's in spiritual theology, and I just love speaking into the hearts of women, and just really reaffirm them of who they are. The Lord has put women in my path throughout the last couple, maybe 10, 15 years, just to really just allow them to see that they are loved, seen, and known, and that the Father in heaven delights in them. And so, and one of the most beautiful ways I'm able to do that too as a volunteer is with the Given Institute. The Given Institute is out of Washington, D.C., and they're formed under the CMSWR, the Council of Major Superiors of Women Religious, and I'm a mentor for them. And we get to mentor young adult women who are have an action plan and to help them realize their action plan. So their action plan could be joining religious life or starting a ministry or starting a business. And so my job is to really mentor them and accompany them through this process and just to be a listening ear and kind of guide them as their action plan is coming into action. So Yeah, God has been very good to me, and to whom much is given, much is expected. And so I feel like God has been so good to me and allowed me the most incredible experiences in my life. And this is my way to give back, to be able to minister to others, to use the knowledge that I've had and the experiences that I have had, to really speak life into women who may be feeling down and depressed, or maybe feeling less than. I just want people to know that they are loved by the Father. That's, I think, the biggest thing right now for me is just really speaking into the fact that your identity as as a son or daughter of the Father really sets the tone for everything that you do. And I think so many people struggle with that knowledge. Like my spiritual director would tell me, when I get stressed out or I get worried about things, he says, stop talking like an orphan. You have a Father in heaven who loves you. And so it's the same thing. I just really want to pass on that knowledge to people who are just struggling with their own identity and their own faith life, and are believing that they're alone, and because they're never alone. They're never alone. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and it's whether intentionally or unintentionally. JP2 is still kind of working through you. It reminds me of his quote of the we're not the sum of our weaknesses and failures, but rather the Father's love for us. And yeah, the whole time you're talking about all the mentorship and all of that. Again, I think back to your experience at World Youth Day, and think how beautiful it is and how necessary, right, a witness is having somebody being able to look at somebody and say, I want that, and having an example, and the beautiful fruits that God has given you now that you get to be that person, and then through that your students, your former students, and these young women will be that for the next generation. So it really does show kind of the goodness and how it multiplies. I saw recently that it looks like you're doing some work for Advent as well with the Advent study. I don't know if you can share a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that I do with Catholic Link, I'm a director of digital small groups, and so, like you said, with community, we're made for each other. And I think one of the biggest things I think everyone realized during the good old pandemic was that we are made for community, and being isolated is not good for us. We need each other. And so we've created this digital small group where we meet via Zoom, and we discuss a book. Last time we did the document of John Paul II's document of Christe Fidelis Laici. We studied that document for 5 or 6 weeks, I believe. And so this Advent, we're doing Prepare Your Heart. It's a book written by Father Agostino Torres, CFR, and printed by Ave Maria Press, and published by Ave Maria Press. And we're going to be diving into a 5-week study into that book, and just kind of journeying towards the newborn King with the saints and the Holy Family, just to prepare our hearts and just to quiet ourselves down in this season of busyness, to quiet ourselves down and receive what the Lord has for us this Advent season. So we'll be beginning that this Saturday, November 25th, sorry, at 9 a.m. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, depending on how quickly we can get this all cleaned up and out there, I'll certainly link that, even if it's a little bit in, just so at the very least people can see it and see the groups. Because no, I think it's absolutely necessary, and it's great to see that the CFRs are still such a big part of your life. Obviously with your brother, but even the work that the other friars are doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. My brother has a podcast too, the Poco a Poco podcast. He's on there. So if you listen to that, he's on there. Yeah.
No, they do fantastic work, and again, it's great to see how the different seasons of the church bring out communities that are needed at this time, and certainly the CFRs are one of them. Before we wrap up, what's kind of your one piece of advice for somebody who's either discerning currently, or on the fence about, hey, is this for me?
Yeah. I would say that to listen to, first of all, you make sure you're speaking to a spiritual director, because I think when you're discerning, it's very hard to recognize your voice from the Father's voice. And sometimes we get a little confused as to what voice we're hearing, because it's emotional. It's emotional. Discernment is emotional, because you want to do what God wants you to do, and you don't want to disappoint the Lord, of course, but you want to make the right decision for your life, right? And so having a spiritual director is just integral in helping you discern, is this the voice of the Father or your voice? Secondly, just spend time in prayer. The Lord will reveal himself to you and what he wants of you in prayer. And just to silent yourselves down. You know, when I was struggling in the religious life, I would make an effort to get to the chapel even earlier in the early morning, and just in the quiet. The only light on in the chapel was by the tabernacle, the sanctuary lamp. And I would just kneel down and just really put a posture of surrender with my arms open, and just lay down before the Lord and just say, Lord, I just want to please you. What is it that you want of me? And so it's just a sense of surrendering and constantly saying yes, um, and allowing the Lord, and knowing that it's okay if you're not called to religious life or the seminary. It's okay. You're not disappointing the Lord. You know, one of the ministries that I started is called Women Fully Alive, and it's for women who have recently left religious life, and they're just trying to navigate coming back into the secular world. And one of the biggest things I hear from these women is they feel like they've failed their families, they failed the Lord, they failed their religious order, and that's not of God. That's not the language that the Lord speaks. So God would never say to you, "You've failed me," never. Um, and so, just the sense of like, to give you permission that it's okay if you're feeling like this is not for you. It's okay, and you're not a disappointment. You're not a failure. Listen to the voice of the Father. He will reveal himself to you. And of course, confer with a spiritual director. But that's the piece of advice I would give, is just to, more prayer, and being honest with yourself, and being honest with your spiritual director, and being honest with the Lord. Being honest with the Lord. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. And again, your story and your ministry all, again, are a beautiful testament to Christ and his love for us and his church. So thank you so much. And I know that there's so many people that have benefited from your time in formation, but certainly outside of that as well. So with that, I want to thank you again for your time and for your prayers. I'll go ahead and put all of the incredible things you're doing linked below so people can follow you. Can't wait to see all the incredible things that happen again from your ministry.
Thank you. Praise God. God is good. God is good. Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all that you do. This is such a necessary avenue for people who are discerning, or in religious life. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.